8 armed soldiers walked into Hartwell General Hospital and asked for a nurse by name. Not the chief of medicine, not the hospital director, a nurse. One who had just been handed a formal complaint accusing her of being dangerous, unqualified, and reckless. One who had spent 3 days being publicly humiliated by a doctor who wore his authority like a weapon. The lobby went silent. Dr. Marcus Vane stood near the reception desk, certain they had come because of him. Then the elevator doors opened, and every single soldier raised their hand in a salute. Before this story goes any further, if you've never been here before, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where stories like this live. Stories about people who get underestimated, pushed down, and counted out, and then make everyone who doubted them regret it. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it, because what happened inside Hartwell General over the course of 72 hours is the kind of thing people in that hospital will not stop talking about for years. The city of Mercer Falls, North Carolina, was the kind of place that took itself seriously. Not in a glamorous way, in a procedural, by-the-book, don't step outside the lines kind of way. Hartwell General Hospital fit that culture perfectly. It was a mid-size regional medical center with a spotless reputation, a well-funded cardiac unit, and an administration that cared deeply about optics. Staff turnover was low, complaints were rare, and the hierarchy, particularly between physicians and nursing staff, was understood by everyone and questioned by almost no one. Claire Novak had been working the 4th floor medical surgical unit for 11 days when everything started to fall apart. She was 29. White, with light blonde hair she kept pulled back so tightly it almost looked painted on. She had a way of moving through a hallway that other nurses noticed. Efficient, economical, no wasted motion. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She just moved like someone who had already calculated the distance between herself and wherever she needed to be. Her paperwork listed 10 years of military service, followed by 18 months of nursing school, followed by a licensed RN certification. Under specialty experience, she had written field medicine, trauma response, emergency stabilization. Under previous roles, she had written combat medic, U.S. Army. That was it. No elaboration, no awards listed, no decorations, commendations, or unit designations. The hiring manager, a tired but thorough woman named Sandra Howell, had asked Claire about it during the interview. "That's pretty sparse for a decade of service," Sandra said. "The work was classified," Claire told her. "I can provide documentation of service dates and honorable discharge. Beyond that, I'm not able to share specifics." Sandra had looked at her for a long moment, then moved on to the next question. Claire got the job. She spent her first week doing exactly what she was supposed to do, following protocol, introducing herself to patients with a soft voice and steady eye contact, charting accurately, checking twice before administering anything. She asked questions when she had them. She didn't volunteer opinions. She was, by every surface-level measure, unremarkable. The nurses who'd been at Hartwell for years were polite but not warm. The unit had its own rhythm, its own inside language, and Claire was still learning the vocabulary. Donna Reyes, who had been charge nurse on the 4th floor for 6 years, gave Claire a fair but brief orientation. Rita Castillo, who had worked nights for most of her career and had opinions about everything, told Claire on day 3 that she seemed too calm. "That going to be a problem?" Claire asked. "Depends on what's underneath it," Rita said. That was the most honest conversation Claire had in her first week. Dr. Marcus Vane was not part of her first week. He rotated onto the medical surgical floor on Claire's 8th day, and within 4 hours, the dynamic on the unit shifted. Vane was 44, board-certified in internal medicine, and had been at Hartwell General for 11 years. He had the particular kind of confidence that comes not from repeated success, but from repeated deference. The way people had consistently stepped aside for him for so long that he had started to believe it was the natural order of things. He was not obviously cruel. He was something worse, casually dismissive, in the way that people are when they have never been forced to justify it. He noticed Claire the way doctors sometimes notice new nurses. The quick, assessing look that was less about the person and more about calculating how they'd fit into the existing structure. He saw her age, her ponytail, her quiet posture. He heard her answer a patient's question about medication timing in a clear, factual way without any unnecessary softening. "New? he said to Donna when Claire had moved down the hall. 11 days, Donna said. Vane nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. Claire caught the look. She didn't react to it. She had seen that look in more context than Vane could probably imagine, worn by people with considerably more actual authority than he had. She turned the corner and went to check on her next patient. The first real incident happened on day 9, though it didn't look like an incident from the outside. Vane had prescribed a medication dosage for a 63-year-old patient named Gerald Marsh, who was recovering from a pulmonary embolism. The dosage was within the acceptable range on paper, but Claire had pulled Marsh's chart in full, his kidney function, his weight, his prior medication history, and the math didn't sit right. At the dosage Vane had written, the risk of bleeding complication was measurably elevated. Not by the standard chart, by the actual patient in front of her. She pulled the attending pharmacist, a quiet man named Derek Olson, aside in the hallway. "Can you run the renal dosing calculation for Marsh in 412?" she said. "I want a second set of eyes before I administer." Derek ran the numbers. He agreed with her. He flagged it to Vane directly, framing it as a pharmacy-side catch, a routine double check, the kind of thing that happened occasionally and was nobody's fault. Vane had the dosage adjusted without comment. Gerald Marsh never knew anything had happened. Claire charted the consultation with Derek and moved on. She didn't tell anyone, she didn't expect anything from it. But Vane had noticed that the flag came after the new nurse had spent time with the pharmacist. He didn't say anything that day, but he started watching her, and the watching had an edge to it that hadn't been there before. On day 10, Vane began testing her. It started small, the way it always does. He'd ask her questions mid-hallway in front of other staff, not because he needed information, but to see how she responded to public pressure. He corrected her charting on a notation that was technically acceptable under the hospital's current format, just formatted differently than he preferred. He told her, in front of 2 other nurses, that new staff sometimes confuse confidence with competence. Claire had looked at him with an action that was entirely neutral. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He hadn't expected that. He had expected either defensiveness or apology. He got neither, and it bothered him in a way he didn't bother to examine. On day 11, he decided to make his point publicly. The 4th floor had a brief midday overlap where day shift and afternoon nurses shared the station, which meant there were usually 8 to 10 staff members within earshot. Vane appeared at the nurses' station with a tablet in hand, pulled up what he said was a continuing education scenario, and asked the floor in general, though his eyes went straight to Claire, if anyone could walk him through the immediate management of a tension pneumothorax in a patient with no access to imaging. The room went quiet the way rooms do when they understand what's actually happening. Rita Castillo, 3 feet to Claire's left, very deliberately found something to look at on the counter. Donna Reyes had her jaw set in a way that said she was choosing not to intervene yet. Claire set down the chart she was holding. "Tension pneumothorax with no imaging," she said. It wasn't a question. She was just repeating it back so he couldn't claim she'd answered a different question. "You're working with clinical presentation, absent breath sounds on the affected side, tracheal deviation away from the affected side, JVD, hypotension, and a patient who is deteriorating despite supplemental oxygen." Vane said nothing. He was watching her. "Immediate decompression," Claire continued. "You're not waiting for confirmation. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line on the affected side, large bore needle, 14 gauge. You get that in and you reassess. If you've got a surgical team or someone trained in the procedure, you're moving toward chest tube placement, 4th or 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. You're monitoring breath sounds continuously. You're watching for reaccumulation." She paused. "You want me to include the backup protocol if the initial decompression doesn't achieve decompression?" The hallway was very quiet. "That's textbook," Vane said. His voice was controlled. "Reciting a protocol is not the same as being able to execute it." "No," Claire said. "It's not." She picked up her chart again and walked toward room 408. Donna Reyes had watched the whole exchange without blinking. Rita Castillo had her arms crossed and was staring at a point somewhere above the medication cabinet, which was what she did when she was keeping herself from saying something she'd regret. Vane left the station and didn't come back for 2 hours. But the thing about a person who's been made to feel embarrassed is that they rarely interpret that embarrassment as evidence that they were wrong. More often, they interpret it as evidence that the other person needs to be brought down further. Claire understood this. She had seen it in enough places and enough ranks that it was almost predictable. What she hadn't predicted was how fast Vane would move. The mass casualty event happened the following morning. It started at 6:14 a.m. when a semi-trailer lost control on the bypass interchange outside Mercer Falls and triggered a chain reaction collision involving 11 vehicles. The emergency department at Hartwell General received the first patients within 22 minutes. By 7 o'clock a.m., the ED was at capacity and overflow patients were being managed on the second floor. By 7:30, they were pulling staff from medical surgical, and Claire was one of the nurses reassigned. She walked into the controlled chaos of the second floor overflow room and immediately assessed the space the way she would have assessed a forward operating position, sight lines, equipment placement, the ratio of critical to stable patients, the number of staff, and their apparent competency levels. There were 4 nurses, 2 residents, and 1 attending she'd never met named Dr. Priya Soman, who looked competent and exhausted in equal measure. There were 9 patients in various states. 2 of them were going to need intervention in the next few minutes, regardless of what else happened. "Who's been triaged?" Claire asked the nearest nurse, a young man named Tyler, who looked like he was 3 critical decisions away from shutting down. "Dr. Soman did a pass," Tyler said. "Beds 2 and 7 are the priority." "Bed 2 has his labored breathing pattern that's changed in the last 10 minutes, Claire said. She had already looked. "Is anyone on that?" Tyler looked at bed 2. We haven't reassessed since—" Claire was already moving. The patient in bed 2 was a 41-year-old man who had been in the rear of one of the colliding vehicles. He had been ambulatory at the scene. He had arrived complaining of chest pain that the initial triage had categorized as musculoskeletal. But his breathing had shifted, faster, shallower, with a subtle asymmetry. Claire caught from 6 feet away. And his color wasn't right. She got to him, did a 60-second hands-on assessment, called for Dr. Soman without raising her voice. And by the time Soman arrived, Claire had already noted the absent breath sounds on the left, the beginning of tracheal deviation, the deteriorating pressure. "Tension pneumo," Claire said quietly. "He needs decompression now." Soman looked at the patient, looked at Claire, made her own assessment in about 15 seconds, and said, "Get me a 14 gauge." What happened over the next 4 minutes was not glamorous. It was fast and uncomfortable, and the patient was frightened, and Claire talked to him the entire time in a low, even voice. Not reassurances exactly, just a steady stream of information about what was happening and what they were doing. While Soman performed the decompression and the relief was immediate and measurable. The patient's breathing evened out. Soman exhaled slowly. She looked at Claire. "Good catch." "Thank you," Claire said, and moved back to help Tyler with bed 7. She spent the next 2 hours moving through that overflow room like she'd been doing it for years. She anticipated supply needs before staff asked, caught a medication confusion before it became an error, helped transfer 2 patients to the main ED when space opened, and at one point, when a second-year resident named Marcus froze during a procedure, stepped close to him and said quietly, "Start with the landmark. Everything else follows," until he found his footing and finished. She never raised her voice. She never made anyone feel small for not knowing something she knew. Dr. Soman, who was running the room with the grim focus of someone who had been managing disaster medicine for 15 years, noticed all of it. She didn't say anything during. There wasn't time. But she noticed. By 10 a.m., the overflow room had stabilized. The mass casualty response was still ongoing in the ED downstairs, but the second-floor overflow had been managed. Patients were stable. No errors, no missed deteriorations. Claire went back to the 4th floor. Vane was waiting. He had not been part of the overflow response. He had been managing his scheduled rounds on the 4th floor during the mass casualty event, which was where he was supposed to be. But he had heard about what happened on the 2nd floor. Hospitals talk, hallways carry sound, and he had arrived at the 4th floor station with a specific kind of energy. "Novak," he said when she came through the door. She looked at him. "I've been told you were performing medical interventions on the 2nd floor during the overflow response." "I was assisting Dr. Soman during the mass casualty event," Claire said. "I was reassigned to overflow by the charge nurse." "Assisting," he repeated. "That's one word for it. The way I heard it, you were assessing patients, directing staff, and making clinical calls that fall outside your scope as a floor nurse. I flagged a clinical deterioration to the attending on site, Claire said. Dr. Soman made every clinical decision. That's what happened. What I heard, Vane said, and his voice had dropped to something that carried more weight than a shout, is that you were acting like you were in charge of that room. Enthusiasm isn't the same as qualification. He turned and walked away. Claire stood at the nurse's station and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth once, which was the only thing that looked like a reaction. Donna Reyes was 3 feet away. She had heard everything. She said nothing yet, but her expression had settled into the particular stillness of someone deciding what to do with what they'd just witnessed. Rita Castillo had not heard the conversation directly, but she had seen Vane's posture and Claire's face, and she had been at Hartwell long enough to recognize what that combination meant. That evening, after her shift, Claire sat in her car in the hospital parking structure for 7 minutes before starting the engine. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking, she was doing the thing she had trained herself to do a long time ago in circumstances considerably more serious than a hostile physician on a medical surgical floor. She was recalibrating, taking inventory, deciding what actually mattered and what was noise. She had not made a clinical error. She had not acted outside her sanctioned role. Dr. Soman could confirm every decision that had been made, but she also understood, with the clarity of someone who had navigated institutional structures for a decade, that being right wasn't always enough. Vane had authority. He had 11 years at this institution. He had relationships with people in this building that she didn't have. And he was the kind of man who, when threatened, moved fast. She started the engine and drove home. The formal complaint arrived the next morning. She didn't hear about it from administration. She heard about it from Donna Reyes, who pulled her into the medication room 20 minutes into her shift and closed the door and handed her a printed copy without preamble. Claire read it. It was 4 paragraphs. It accused her of performing unauthorized medical interventions during the mass casualty overflow response, acting outside her licensed scope of practice, and creating a safety risk through unchecked and unsupervised clinical actions. It cited the tension pneumothorax response specifically, not incorrectly in terms of what had happened, but framed in a way that made her role sound autonomous when it had been entirely collaborative. It was signed by Dr. Marcus Vane. He filed it last night, Donna said. Administration has it. HR has it. You'll be called in today or tomorrow. Claire folded the paper once along the center crease and held it. Did anyone from the overflow response give a statement? She asked. Not yet, Donna said. They just received it this morning. Dr. Soman was the attending. She directed every intervention. I know that, Donna said. And I saw what happened on this floor yesterday. But Marcus Vane has been here 11 years, and he's made complaints before, and they've always landed a certain way. Claire looked at her. What are you telling me? Donna held her gaze. I'm telling you to be careful about who you trust in this building right now. It was the most useful piece of information anyone had given her since she arrived. Claire folded the paper a second time, put it in her scrubs pocket, and walked back out to the floor. She spent the rest of the morning doing her job. She checked vitals, administered medications, sat with an elderly patient who was scared about a procedure scheduled for the afternoon, and listened to him talk about his garden in the way that people sometimes need to talk about something ordinary when they are surrounded by things that feel out of their control. She charted accurately. She answered call lights. She did not look like someone whose career was in the process of being dismantled. But the word had spread the way words spread in hospitals, fast, incomplete, and slightly distorted by the time it reached the 3rd repetition. By 11 o'clock a.m., there were staff members on the 4th floor who had heard something happen with the new nurse and the overflow response. By noon, the version circulating included phrases like acted on her own, didn't follow protocol, and Dr. Vane had to file a formal report. Claire heard a fragment of it in the hallway near the supply room. She didn't correct it. She kept walking. In the break room at 12:30, she poured coffee into a mug that had someone else's name on it. She grabbed it by mistake, realized halfway through the pour, and decided it didn't matter, and sat down alone for 6 minutes before she had to go back. She was almost finished when the break room door opened and a woman she'd seen only twice before sat down across from her without asking. The woman was in her late 50s, with close-cropped silver hair and the look of someone who had spent decades absorbing other people's crises without letting them accumulate visibly. Her name badge said Margaret Ellis, Charge nurse, surgical ICU. You don't know me, Margaret said, but I was on the second floor yesterday morning during the first hour of the overflow. Claire looked at her. I saw you work, Margaret said. The whole thing, start to finish. Claire waited. I've been at this hospital for 22 years, Margaret said. I've worked with a lot of nurses. I've worked with trauma medics who came into civilian practice. I've worked with people who thought they knew what they were doing and people who actually knew what they were doing. She paused. You actually know what you're doing. Dr. Soman made every call, Claire said. I know she did, Margaret said, because you gave her the information she needed to make them, and then you stepped back and let her. That's not what someone reckless does. That's what someone trained does. Silence. What are you telling me? Claire asked. I'm telling you that I saw it, Margaret said, and that I'll say so. To whoever needs to hear it. Margaret stood, smoothed her scrubs, and walked out of the break room without waiting for a response. Claire sat with the coffee, cold now, in someone else's mug, and thought about the fact that in 11 days at this hospital, the most substantive conversation she'd had was with a woman she'd never formally met, in a break room at noon, while her career was apparently being systematically dismantled one corridor at a time. She thought about what she hadn't told any of them, what wasn't on her paperwork because it couldn't be, and what she had deliberately left behind because she had wanted, for the first time in 10 years, to just be a nurse. Not a soldier, not a specialist, not a cleared operative who had run medical support in circumstances these hallways couldn't conceptualize. Just a nurse. She had wanted to earn it plainly, without the weight of what she'd done before propping up everything that came after. She had told herself she could leave it behind. She rinsed the mug, put it in the drying rack, and walked back out to the floor. In a building 37 miles away, in an office that had no identifying signage on its exterior door, a man in civilian clothes sat in front of a monitor and read a flagged report that had come in overnight. The report contained a name, Claire Novak, and a hospital address, and a series of data points that had been cross-referenced against a restricted personnel file. The man read it twice. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. She's at Hartwell General in Mercer Falls, he said. She's been there 11 days. There was a pause on the other end. Yes, the man said. That Claire Novak. Another pause. We're not waiting any longer, the man on the other end said. Get a team together. We're going in person. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds, and the man who made it did not sleep well that night. Claire Novak didn't know any of that. She was home by 7:40 p.m., eating leftover rice and vegetables she'd made 2 days ago, watching nothing in particular on her laptop screen while her mind continued to run the day's events in the background the way it always did. Not ruminating exactly, more like an after-action review that happened automatically. She had gotten into the habit in the Army and never fully gotten out of it. Every day had a debrief, even if the only person in the room was her. The debrief for today was not good. The complaint was real, it was documented, and it had been filed by someone with institutional weight. Dr. Soman hadn't reached out. Margaret Ellis had offered to speak, but an offer wasn't a statement, and statements weren't guarantees. HR would call her in, and HR calls in situations like this rarely favored the person who had been there 11 days over the person who had been there 11 years. Claire understood how these systems worked. She had spent a decade inside systems that were far less transparent and considerably more consequential, and the one thing they all had in common was that they rewarded those who had built relationships over time, regardless of who was actually right. She scraped the rest of the rice into a container, put it in the fridge, and went to bed at 9:15. She was asleep in under 10 minutes, which was something people always found surprising about her when they found out. The ability to shut down on command. It wasn't calm. It wasn't peace. It was discipline. The same discipline that let her function on 4 hours in a field tent with artillery moving somewhere in the middle distance. The same discipline that let her walk onto a hospital floor 11 days into a new job and act like she'd been there for years. You sleep when you can. You stay sharp when you have to. Her alarm went off at 5:45 a.m. She was back at Hartwell General by 6:50, 15 minutes before her shift started. The HR call came at 8:10. The woman's name was Linda Forsyth, and she had the particular voice of someone who had conducted a great number of difficult conversations and had learned to keep her tone so neutral it was almost textureless. She told Claire that a formal complaint had been received and logged, that an investigation process would be initiated, and that Claire would be expected to provide a written statement by end of business the following day. She told Claire that during the investigation period, her duties would continue as normal, but she should not discuss the matter with colleagues directly involved. "Is there anything you'd like to clarify at this stage?" Linda asked. "Dr. Priya Soman was the attending physician on the second-floor overflow," Claire said. "Every clinical intervention that occurred during the mass casualty event was under her direction. I'd encourage you to contact her for a statement." "We'll be speaking with all relevant parties," Linda said. "Thank you, Ms. Novak." The call lasted 6 minutes. Claire went back to her patients. She spent the first half of her shift in the kind of focused, deliberate routine that outsiders might have mistaken for detachment. She wasn't detached. She was conserving. Everything that wasn't directly in front of her, the complaint, Vane, the question of what Linda Forsythe was going to do with a pile of statements from people who had not been where Claire had been, got compressed and set aside, the way you compress a wound when you don't have time to properly treat it yet. You hold pressure. You keep moving. You deal with it when there's space to deal with it. Gerald Marsh in 412 asked her if she was okay. He was 63 years old and recovering from a pulmonary embolism, and he had noticed apparently that her jaw was set differently than it usually was. "I'm fine, Mr. Marsh," she said. "You don't have to do that," he said. The fine thing. I spent 40 years in manufacturing management. I know what someone looks like when they're managing something they're not talking about." Claire looked at him for a moment. "There's a situation at work," she said, which was more than she had told anyone. "I'm handling it." "Yeah," he said. "That's what I figured." He settled back against his pillow. "For what it's worth, you're a good nurse. My wife was a nurse for 30 years. I know the difference." She didn't say anything. She adjusted his IV line, checked his vitals, and recorded everything accurately. "Thank you, Mr. Marsh," she said on the way out. She meant it more than it sounded. The second escalation came just before noon, and it didn't arrive through official channels. Dr. Marcus Vane was not the kind of person who filed a complaint and then stepped back to let the process run. People who filed complaints and stepped back were people who trusted the process to produce the outcome they wanted. Vane was not that kind of person. He was the kind of person who filed a complaint and then worked the room, quietly, conversationally, in the way that senior physicians sometimes do when they want to shape a narrative without appearing to do so directly. Claire heard it from Tyler, the young nurse who had been in the overflow room during the mass casualty event. He found her near the supply room at 11:45 and looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who was about to say something they weren't sure they should say. "I don't want to be in the middle of this," Tyler started. "Okay," Claire said. She waited. "But I heard Dr. Vane talking to Dr. Harlan in the attendings lounge this morning. I wasn't trying to listen. The door was open." Dr. Patrick Harlan was the chief of the medical staff at Hartwell General. He was 61, had been at the hospital for 23 years, and was the kind of institutional figure whose opinions settled things. "What did he say?" Claire asked. Tyler looked at his shoes briefly, then back at her. "He said that what happened on the second floor was the kind of thing that happens when nurses overstep because nobody corrects them early enough. He said the problem with military background nursing staff is that they come in thinking combat medicine translates directly to clinical care, and it doesn't, and someone needs to establish that boundary clearly." Tyler paused. He said he hoped administration would handle it the right way. Claire processed this. "He used the phrase military background nursing staff specifically," she said. "Yes." "Who else was in the room?" "I couldn't see. Dr. Harlan was, and someone else, but I couldn't see from the hallway." "Okay," Claire said. "Thank you for telling me." Tyler looked slightly relieved that she hadn't reacted the way he had apparently been bracing for. I was in that room. You didn't do anything wrong. I wanted you to know that." "Can you put that in a statement?" Claire asked. The relief on his face complicated itself. Yeah, I think so. I don't know how these things work." "HR is collecting statements from staff who were present during the overflow response," Claire said. "If you were there, your account is relevant. You don't have to say anything beyond what you actually saw." Tyler nodded, still looking like he was calculating the professional cost of involving himself. "You don't have to," Claire said again. She meant it. She was not going to pressure someone who was scared into a situation that could affect their job. She understood the calculation. She had made versions of it herself. "No," Tyler said, and his voice was slightly more solid. No, I was there. I'll give a statement. He went back to his patients. Claire went back to hers. She spent her lunch break, 14 minutes, eaten standing at the counter in the break room because there were no seats available and she hadn't wanted to wait, writing her own formal statement. She did it in the same way she had been trained to write after-action reports, precise, chronological, stripped of interpretation, and limited to observable facts. She listed the time she arrived at the overflow room, who was present, what she assessed, what she communicated, what Dr. Soman directed, and what the outcomes were. She used no adjectives that weren't clinical. She stated nothing she couldn't support with documentation or witness accounts. She read it over twice, changed 2 words, and sent it to HR by 12:53 p.m. The afternoon brought a different kind of pressure. Vane came to the 4th floor at 2:30 for rounds, which was his scheduled time, and there was nothing procedurally unusual about his being there. But the way he moved through the floor had changed. He was more deliberate in the hallways near the nurses' station. He asked questions at a slightly higher volume than necessary. He reviewed charts in the common area rather than the physician's workspace. He was visible. He was making sure Claire could see him. Claire gave him nothing. She worked. She checked on patients, updated charts, coordinated with the afternoon shift pharmacist on 2 medication reviews, and at one point passed within 4 feet of Vane in the hallway without breaking stride or adjusting her expression. He watched her pass. She did not look back. But something was happening underneath the surface of the floor that was harder to navigate than Vane's choreographed visibility. The complaint, and the particular way Vane had been moving through the hospital since filing it, had split the floor's ambient sympathy in a way that was subtle but real. Not dramatic, not loud. More like the way a room changes temperature by 2 degrees. You don't notice it immediately, but you feel it in your joints eventually. Some staff were warmer. Rita Castillo had made a point of standing near Claire at the medication cart that morning and asking her a detailed question about one of Claire's patients, which was Rita's way of signaling that she was not distancing herself. Donna Reyes was professional and exactly as even-keeled as she always was, which in its own way was a form of steadiness. But 2 of the nurses Claire had been building an easy working rhythm with, a woman named Jenny Park and an older nurse named Paul Whitmore, had started routing around her in ways that weren't overt enough to call obvious, but were consistent enough to be deliberate. Jenny found reasons to hand off patient coordination to the other nurses when Claire was the natural choice. Paul stopped making eye contact in the hallway when he had been doing it without thinking for the past week. They were not cruel people. They were scared people, which in Claire's experience sometimes produced the same outcomes. She didn't blame them. She didn't spend time on it. But she logged it in the same way she logged everything, accurately, without embellishment, because the accurate version was already enough to deal with. At 3:45, Dr. Priya Soman appeared on the 4th floor. Soman had no clinical reason to be on the 4th floor. Her patients were in the ED and occasionally in the surgical ICU. She was not a medical surgical physician. When she walked through the door, Claire was at the nurse's station entering chart updates, and she noticed Soman immediately, because Soman walked like someone who had a specific destination and had already decided she was going there regardless of what was in her way. She came to the nurse's station. She looked at Claire. "I gave a statement to HR this morning," Soman said without preamble. Claire looked at her. "I outlined my role as the directing physician during the mass casualty overflow response and described the contributions of all assisting staff." Soman's voice was level and measured. "I noted that every clinical decision made in that room was made under my supervision and authorization, and that the nursing staff performed within appropriate boundaries and demonstrated exceptional competency." "Thank you," Claire said. "Don't thank me," Soman said. "What happened in that room was accurate. I stated accurate things. That's what a statement is for." She paused. "What's happening to you on this floor is not accurate. Someone should be saying that, so I'm saying it." She left. Rita Castillo, who had been approximately 10 feet away and had heard all of it, met Claire's eyes for a half-second. Claire gave a small nod. Rita turned back to what she was doing. For the first time in 2 days, Claire felt something that wasn't exactly optimism. She had too much experience with how institutions operated to commit to optimism, but was closer to it than she'd been since the complaint landed. Soman's statement was significant. Soman had 20 years in emergency medicine, a reputation for precision, and no institutional reason to stake anything on behalf of a nurse she had met 48 hours ago during a mass casualty event. The fact that she had done it anyway meant the record was going to be harder to rewrite than Vane had probably calculated. But Vane hadn't finished. At 4:55, 15 minutes before Claire's shift ended, she received a second call from Linda Forsyth in HR. The voice was exactly as textureless as before. Ms. Novak, I want to update you on the investigation timeline. We've received several statements, and we'll be conducting a formal review meeting in 2 days. You'll be expected to attend with or without a representative. Understood, Claire said. I also want to inform you that Dr. Vane has provided a supplemental complaint this afternoon. Claire said nothing for a moment. A supplemental complaint? Yes. He has added an allegation that you engaged in unsanctioned patient assessment on this unit, the 4th floor, on a date prior to the mass casualty event. Specifically, a medication concern flagged to the attending pharmacist. The Gerald Marsh situation. He had gone back and found it. Derek Olson in pharmacy flagged a dosing concern to Dr. Vane directly, Claire said carefully. I requested a pharmacist consultation, which is within nursing scope. The pharmacist made the determination and communicated it through the appropriate channel. That will be part of what the review committee considers, Linda said. I want to make sure you're aware of the full scope of what will be addressed. Thank you for telling me, Claire said. The call ended. She stood at the nurse's station with her hand still on her phone and performed a very specific kind of internal arithmetic. The kind where you calculate what you have, what you don't have, what can be verified, and what is going to be a matter of whose version sounds more credible in a conference room. Derek Olson could confirm the pharmacy consultation. The process had been appropriate. But Vane's framing, that she had been going around physicians, undermining clinical authority, operating with a recklessness masked by apparent competence, was the kind of framing that could take root if the review committee had no other context. And they had no context because the context was classified. The full weight of that irony settled on her for about 30 seconds. And then she put her phone in her pocket and finished her charting and signed out of her shift. She was almost at the elevator when she heard footsteps behind her. Quick ones, the kind that meant someone was catching up deliberately. She turned. It was Dr. Natalie Brooks, one of the internal medicine residents who worked the 4th floor. Brooks was 31, originally from somewhere in the Midwest based on her flat vowels, and had been at Hartwell for 18 months. She and Claire had had exactly 3 direct interactions prior to this moment, all of them clinical and brief. Brooks looked like she'd been working herself up to something. I need to talk to you, she said. Now? Claire said. Her shift was over. She was tired. It'll be quick. Brooks glanced toward the nurse's station, then back. I was in the attendings lounge this morning when Dr. Vane was talking to Dr. Harlan. Claire waited. I heard the whole thing, Brooks said. I was in the corner with my laptop. I don't think he knew I was there, or maybe he didn't care. She paused. The things he said, the framing of it wasn't accurate. What he described and what actually happened on that floor are not the same situation. Did you say anything to Dr. Harlan? Claire asked. Brooks looked at her feet for a second. No. Why? The question wasn't unkind. It was just a question. Because Harlan's opinion of me matters for my fellowship application, Brooks said. It came out with the blunt honesty of someone who had decided to stop softening it. I was scared. I'm still scared. And I know how that sounds. Claire looked at her. It sounds like someone being honest about a difficult position. Brooks seemed slightly off balance by the response. She had probably expected something sharper. I can give a statement to HR, she said. I don't know if I can say anything to Harlan directly, but I can put in writing what I actually heard. If you do it, Claire said, it needs to be accurate. Not advocating for me, just what you actually heard, word for word, as precisely as you can remember. I know, Brooks said. I've been rehearsing it in my head all day. She paused again. I'm sorry I didn't say something in the room. Claire considered her for a moment. Not with anger. She had run out of the specific energy that anger required sometime around hour 3 of the overflow response, but with something more like assessment. Don't apologize to me, Claire said. Give the statement. She got in the elevator. She drove home in the early evening traffic, the kind of slow-rolling accumulation of vehicles that moved through Mercer Falls between 5:15 and 6:30, and she thought about the shape of the next 2 days. The review committee. The statements that were stacking up on both sides, Soman's, Tyler's, possibly Brooks's, against Vane's original complaint and supplemental allegation and whatever version of events he'd managed to get into Harlan's head. Derek Olson in pharmacy, who had no reason to misrepresent what had happened, and every professional reason to document the consultation accurately. It was not a losing hand. It was genuinely not a losing hand if the process worked the way it was supposed to work. She had seen enough processes to know that was not a guarantee. She turned onto her street and saw a car parked 2 houses down that had not been there when she left that morning. Dark color, no markings, license plate from a county 3 hours north of Mercer Falls. The engine was off. She couldn't see into it clearly from this angle. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment. The car didn't move. She went inside. She made dinner. Actual cooking this time, not leftovers, because she needed something to do with her hands. She browned chicken in a pan, cut vegetables with the kind of mechanical focus that kept her from thinking about anything she didn't want to think about. She ate at her kitchen table, which she did not always do, because the table meant sitting still, and sitting still meant the debrief ran whether she wanted it to or not. The car outside had bothered her more than the complaint. The complaint she understood. She could map its logic, trace its motivation, anticipate its probable trajectory. It was a system operating in a recognizable way, even if the system was being used badly. The car was from a different category of situation entirely. She had spent 10 years in a category of situation that could produce that kind of car. A vehicle with no markings, parked in a residential street, hours after someone 37 miles away had said, "Get a team together, we're going in person." She did not know for certain that those two things were connected. She did not know for certain that the car was anything other than a neighbor's visitor or a delivery driver who had parked and walked somewhere. But she had not stayed alive and functional for 10 years in difficult circumstances by dismissing the things that felt wrong. She cleaned the pan, put the leftovers away, and checked her phone. No messages from anyone at the hospital. No messages from anyone else either, which was its own kind of information. She went to the window and looked at the street. The car was gone. She stood at the window for a long moment, looking at the empty space where it had been, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not fear, not relief, just the particular alertness of someone who has spent enough time in the world to know that gone and finished are not the same thing. She went to bed. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, the kind of flat November light that made the hospital parking lot look like a still image of itself. Claire arrived at 6:48. She went through her morning routine, handoff report, patient assessments, medication checks, with the same focused efficiency as every other morning, and the fourth floor moved around her in its usual patterns, except that the patterns were now slightly reconfigured by everything that had happened. Donna Reyes pulled her aside at 7:30. "I've been thinking about the Marsh consult," Donna said. "I was at the nurse's station when you talked to Derek. I heard the conversation." "I know," Claire said. "I'll add it to my statement," Donna said, "if they're going to include it in the review." It wasn't warmth, exactly. Donna wasn't a warm person in the effusive sense, but it was something solid, and solid was what Claire needed. By 9:00, the fourth floor was running at its normal mid-morning pace. Vane had not yet arrived for rounds. The gray light outside the windows had gotten slightly brighter without becoming actually pleasant. Claire was at the nurse's station working through her charts when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. "Your personnel file has been flagged by a federal office. This is not a threat. We'll be at your location tomorrow morning." She read it twice. Then she looked up from her phone at the wall across from the nurse's station, which had a whiteboard listing patient room numbers and assigned nurses in dry erase marker, and then at the window at the end of the hall, through which the gray November sky was doing nothing in particular. She locked her phone and put it in her pocket. She picked up the next chart. She had known this was possible. She had not known the timeline. Tomorrow morning changed the shape of the next 24 hours in ways she hadn't fully mapped yet, and she needed to think clearly, and thinking clearly meant finishing her shift without allowing the alert in her chest to climb into her face where anyone could see it. She was 3 charts into the morning stack when Dr. Marcus Vane appeared at the end of the hallway. He walked toward the nurse's station at his usual pace, and he had the specific posture of someone who had decided that yesterday's conversation with the chief of medical staff had gone well enough to warrant a certain confidence today. He looked at Claire as he approached the station. She looked at him. Novak, he said. His tone had shifted slightly. Not warmer, but more deliberate. The tone of someone managing a situation they believe they control. I want to make clear that my concern in all of this has been about patient safety. That's the only reason I filed the complaint. Claire looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. He seemed to expect more. That's all you have to say? He said. Yes, she said. Vane's jaw tightened slightly. The review is in 2 days. I think it would be better for everyone if you were considering whether this position is the right fit, whether you'd be more comfortable somewhere with a different... Dr. Vane, Claire said, and her voice was quiet and completely flat. I'm going to ask you to stop. He stopped. I'm going to attend the review, she said. I'm going to present my account. I'm not going anywhere based on a complaint that misrepresents what happened in that overflow room, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't approach me about this again outside of a formal setting. She turned back to her charts. Vane stood there for a moment, not moving, not speaking, with the expression of a man recalibrating in real time. And then he turned and went to the physician's workspace. The nurse's station was very quiet. Rita Castillo, who had been at the medication cart throughout that entire exchange, waited exactly 3 seconds after Vane's footsteps faded before she said, without looking up from what she was doing, "Good." It was a single syllable. It was enough. Claire finished her charts. The day moved forward, the way days do in hospitals. Not linearly, not cleanly, but in the uneven rhythm of crises addressed and symptoms managed and patients talked to and procedures documented, and somewhere underneath all of it, the low-grade hum of the situation that was still unresolved and the text on her phone that was still in her pocket, and the fact that tomorrow morning something was going to change in a way she could not entirely predict. She was handing off to the afternoon shift at 5:20 when Jenny Park, who had been routing around her for 2 days, appeared at the edge of the nurse's station and waited until the handoff was finished. Jenny looked tired and slightly embarrassed. She was 34, meticulous, and had been at Hartwell for 4 years. She was, Claire suspected, someone who experienced her own cowardice more painfully than most people experience their own moral failures, which was its own kind of character. I'm going to add my name to the statement list, Jenny said, for the overflow response. Claire looked at her. I wasn't in the room, Jenny said quickly. I was in the hallway for part of it. I saw enough. Then say what you saw, Claire said. Jenny nodded. There was clearly something else she wanted to say, some additional thing she was carrying, but she didn't say it, and Claire didn't press her. Sometimes people's threshold for honesty has a single-item limit, and you have to respect that. She signed out, collected her things, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the ground floor and stood in the elevator as it descended and thought about the text again. Federal office. Tomorrow morning. She thought about what it would mean for the people in this building, for Vane, for the review committee, for Linda Forsythe's carefully neutral voice. When tomorrow morning arrived, she thought about what it would mean for herself. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the lobby. Standing near the reception desk, pretending to study a hospital directory he was clearly not actually reading, was a man she had never seen in this building before. He was in civilian clothes, dark jacket, no badge, standing with the particular stillness of someone trained to occupy space without drawing attention to it. Competent stillness. Deliberate stillness. He didn't look at her when the elevator opened, but his posture changed, fractionally, in a way she recognized. She walked past him without slowing down, pushed through the front doors, and crossed the parking lot to her car. He had been inside her hospital. Tomorrow morning was already here. She drove home with her hands at 10 and 2 and her eyes checking the rearview mirror more than usual, not because she thought anyone was following her, but because the man in the lobby had recalibrated something in her chest that she couldn't immediately recalibrate back. She knew what that kind of stillness meant. She had been trained to produce it herself. You learn to occupy public space in a way that looked casual from a distance but was functionally the opposite. You were tracking everything, logging it, ready to move in any direction inside of 2 seconds. Civilians couldn't fake it. You either had that particular relationship with your own body or you didn't, and it took years of specific pressure to build it. The man near the reception desk had it, which meant someone had sent him there, which meant the text message hadn't been a notification. It had been a courtesy. She ate dinner without tasting it, showered, and sat on the edge of her bed for a while, doing nothing in particular, which was not something she did often. Usually the debrief was running. Usually there was something to process and organize. But tonight the variables were too many and the information too incomplete. And the only honest assessment she could make was, tomorrow is going to change things, and there is no preparation for the specific shape of how. She slept. Her alarm went off at 5:45 and she lay there for exactly 1 additional minute, which was the same thing she did every morning, and then she got up. She arrived at Hartwell General at 6:52. The lobby was ordinary, no one standing near the reception desk who wasn't supposed to be there. The morning security guard, an older man named Curtis, who always had coffee in a thermos and always nodded at the same angle, nodded at her. She nodded back. The elevator opened on the first press of the button. The 4th floor was beginning its day. Handoff report was at 7 o'clock. Claire took her seat at the table in the small conference room used for shift change, with Donna Reyes at the head and 6 other nurses ranged around the table in the particular disarray of people who are either ending a 12-hour night or beginning one, and the incoming and outgoing accounts of patients moved around the table in the usual rhythm, room by room, problem by problem, medication by medication, and Claire listened and took her notes and said what needed to be said and nothing else. By 7:20, she was on the floor. By 7:45, she was deep enough into the morning's actual work that the specific quality of her alertness had settled into something functional rather than anticipatory. She checked the patient in 406 who had developed a low-grade fever overnight, assessed it, communicated it to the day's covering physician, not Vane, a hospitalist named Dr. Owens, who was even-keeled and direct and had no visible investment in the current situation on this floor. She updated the Marsh chart, noticed his creatinine had trended slightly and flagged it with a note. She helped a patient in 410 who was trying to get to the bathroom and whose call light had not been answered inside of 4 minutes because the floor was a person short this morning. It was all ordinary. The ordinary was what she was good at, and the ordinary was what mattered. At 9:15, Donna Reyes appeared at the nurse's station with a specific expression that Claire had learned to read over the past 2 weeks. It was the expression Donna wore when something had happened that she had not anticipated and had not yet decided how to process. "Security desk just got a call," Donna said. She kept her voice below the ambient noise of the floor. "Federal representative. They're sending a small team to speak with a staff member. They want access at 10:20. Claire's vitals didn't change. Her face didn't change. She said, "All right." Donna looked at her for a moment. "You knew." "I was told someone was coming," Claire said. "The exact time." Donna looked like she was adding this to a calculation she'd been running for a while. "Is there anything I need to know before 10:20? "No," Claire said. "Nothing that affects the floor." Donna accepted this, which said something about her, that she could hold the open space of incomplete information without immediately demanding it be filled. She went back to her work. At 9:40, Dr. Marcus Vane arrived for his rounds. He was earlier than usual, which Claire noticed, and which probably meant he'd heard something about the federal call to the security desk, which in a hospital with Hartwell's communication density was entirely possible. He moved through the floor with a slightly heightened version of his usual authority, less visibly, more internally, the way some people compensate when they sense something outside their control is approaching. He didn't speak to Claire. She didn't speak to him. He was at the nurse's station reviewing his patient list when Margaret Ellis came off the elevator at 10:05. Margaret had no scheduled reason to be on the 4th floor at 10:05 on a Thursday morning. She was surgical ICU. But she came off that elevator with a cup of coffee in one hand and the particular deliberateness of someone who had decided where they were going to be and at what time. She stood near the station. She caught Claire's eye and gave one small nod. Claire gave one back. At 10:09, the hospital administrator on duty, a thin, tightly organized man named Frank Dorsey, who wore the same style of rimless glasses every day and whose default expression was one of controlled administrative concern, appeared on the 4th floor in a way that was itself unusual. Administrators did not routinely appear on medical surgical floors mid-morning without a specific operational reason. Frank Dorsey's presence suggested that the security desk's call had traveled up the chain faster than Claire had expected. He positioned himself near the elevator bank without appearing to position himself. He had a tablet. He looked at the tablet. Vane noticed him. Vane's eyes moved from Dorsey to the elevator and back, and the calculation happening behind his face was visible to anyone paying attention. The floor ran. The clock ran. At 10:17, Rita Castillo appeared at the medication cart and stayed there without any particular urgency, which meant she also knew or suspected something and had decided she was not going to be anywhere else when it happened. By 10:19, the fourth-floor hallway had a quality to it that was different from its usual mid-morning quality. Not louder, not more active, just more awake. The way the air in a room changes when everyone in it is paying attention to the same thing without admitting it. The elevator doors opened at 10:22. They came in pairs, not military formation, not stacked and tactical, but with the particular spacing of people who are trained to move through civilian spaces in a way that is efficient without being alarming. 8 of them total, in subdued clothing that was not quite civilian and not quite uniform. Dark tactical pants, soft-shelled jackets, no visible insignia. They moved like they'd already been in the building in their heads before they walked through the door. The lead operative was a man in his early 50s with a weathered face and close-cropped gray hair, and he walked with the specific economy of someone who had been operating in high-pressure environments since before some of the nurses on this floor were born. He stopped at the nurses' station. "We're looking for Claire Novak," he said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Frank Dorsey stepped forward. "I'm the administrator on Claire Novak," the man said again, not unkindly but without any modification of his intent. "Is she on this floor?" Dorsey looked toward the hallway. Dr. Marcus Vane, standing 6 feet from the nurses' station, had gone completely still. His eyes were moving between the 8 people who had just come off the elevator and the administrator who was apparently unable to redirect them. His face had the look of someone whose internal model of a situation has just been revised without his consent. Claire was at the end of the hallway, near room 408, where she had been checking in on a patient who was anxious about a procedure scheduled for the afternoon. She had heard the elevator open. She had heard the voice. She finished what she was saying to the patient. "I'll check back before they come for you, okay? You're doing fine," and stepped out of the room. She walked down the hallway toward the nurses' station. She was in her blue scrubs, her hair pulled back, her badge clipped to her chest. She was not hurrying. She was moving the way she always moved through a hallway, efficiently, no wasted steps. She could see the 8 people clearly now. She could see the lead operative clearly. She recognized the unit designation he wasn't visibly wearing, but didn't need to. The hallway was very quiet. The lead operative looked at her. And then he did something that nobody on that floor had seen a federal operative in tactical gear do in a medical surgical hallway before. He raised his right hand, palm down, to his forehead in a clean military salute. For a half second, nothing else moved. Then the 7 people behind him raised their hands in the same gesture, in the same clean line, and held it. Marcus Vane's chart slipped in his hand. He caught it. Nobody looked at him. Claire stopped 3 feet from the lead operative. She held his gaze for a moment, and what passed across her face was not satisfaction, and not vindication, and not the particular expression of someone watching their victory materialize. It was something quieter and more complicated than any of those things. The expression of someone who had hoped this particular past would stay where she'd put it, and has just been told, definitively, that it won't. She gave a single nod. The salute dropped. The lead operative, his name was Warwick, the W from the text message, extended his hand. Claire shook it. "We need about 20 minutes, Warwick said. "Is there somewhere private?" Frank Dorsey found his voice. "We have a conference room on—" "Yes," Claire said. She looked at Donna Reyes. "I'll be back." Donna's expression was completely unreadable, which meant she was feeling several things simultaneously and had chosen to feel them privately. She nodded. Claire walked to the conference room with Warwick and 2 of his team. The other 5 stayed in the hallway with a stillness that was not aggressive but was entirely definitive. The kind of stillness that communicates, without any verbalization, that they are not moving and the space around them is currently accounted for. Vane was still at the nurse's station. He had not moved. Rita Castillo, to his left, was now openly watching him with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to adjust and is watching it adjust in real time. In the conference room, Warwick set a single folder on the table. He didn't open it. He looked at Claire. "You know why we're here," he said. It was not a question. "Broadly," Claire said. "The intelligence product from the Kellerman operation," Warwick said. "The materials you developed and submitted through the sanitized channel before your discharge." We've been working verification on it for 18 months. 3 weeks ago, we actioned it. Claire was quiet. There was a coordinated threat package targeting 2 transit infrastructure sites and 1 municipal water treatment facility in the Mid-Atlantic region, Warwick said. The technical detail in your product gave us the attribution chain we needed. 11 individuals. The action is complete. Claire looked at the table for a moment. How many people? The threat assessment had a casualty projection in the thousands, Warwick said. That's as specific as I can be in this setting. She nodded slowly. She had done the work years ago, in a context that had required her to understand systems she would have preferred not to understand. She had submitted it through the appropriate channel when she separated because she believed someone should have it, even if she didn't want to carry it anymore. She had not known for certain that it would ever be used. She had not known for certain that she would ever hear about it if it was. We've been trying to locate you, Warwick said. Your forwarding information wasn't current. I moved twice, she said. We know that now. He paused. We came in person because we needed you to understand the scope of what happened, and because there are some administrative matters connected to your service record that we need to address directly. My service record is complete, Claire said. It is, Warwick said. The specific unit designation and operational scope attached to your record have been partially reclassified upward. That affects your formal standing. The relevant documentation is in the folder. He pushed it toward her. You don't need to do anything with it today, but you should have it. She looked at the folder. She didn't open it. There's one more thing, Warwick said. We received a flag from a civilian HR system connected to your current employment. A complaint review. Claire looked at him. We didn't request that flag, Warwick said carefully. It came through an automated cross-reference against your classified record. When a personnel action is initiated against someone with your clearance level, certain systems notify us. Standard protocol. He paused. What's happening with the complaint is your situation to manage. We're not intervening in civilian employment matters. But I want you to know that the people reviewing your record will see a notation that it has been cross-referenced by a federal office. What they make of that is their decision. Claire understood exactly what he was saying and exactly what he wasn't saying. Understood, she said. Warwick stood. He picked up the folder and handed it to her. Take your time with it. There's no required response. I know, she said. She walked back out into the hallway with the folder at her side. The 5 operatives in the hall shifted fractionally when she appeared. Not toward her, but simply in the way that people shift when the person they are there for is back in sight. Warwick and his team assembled without a word, the way groups do when they have spent enough time operating together that language has become optional for most functions. The 4th-floor hallway, in its entirety, was watching. Frank Dorsey was still near the elevator. He had lost the administrative composure he'd arrived with, not dramatically, but his tablet was at his side and his eyes were doing the rapid calculation of someone whose understanding of a situation has been significantly restructured. Margaret Ellis, who had not moved from her position near the nurses' station, was watching Claire with an expression that was calm and unsurprised and something else underneath, something that looked, if you were paying close attention, like satisfaction held at a careful distance. Donna Reyes was at the nurses' station. She met Claire's eyes once and looked away, which was Donna's version of needing a moment. Rita Castillo was not trying to hide anything. She was watching Vane. Vane had not moved from his position near the station throughout the entire 22 minutes. He was holding his tablet in both hands now, which was not how he usually held it, and his face had cycled through several configurations and had landed on something that was not quite composure and not quite confusion, something in between. The expression of a man who has built a great deal of his sense of himself on reading rooms correctly, and has just discovered he had misread this one in every possible direction. Warwick stopped at the nurses' station. He looked at Claire. We know what you did, he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried in the way that quiet voices carry in silent spaces. We came to thank you. He extended his hand again. She shook it again. He and his team went to the elevator. The doors opened. They stepped in, all 8, with the same spacing they'd arrived with. The doors closed. The 4th-floor hallway held its silence for 3 full seconds after the elevator number changed. Then Frank Dorsey said, Ms. Novak, can we? I have patience, Claire said, and she walked back to the floor. For the next 40 minutes, she worked. She checked in on the patient in 406 whose fever had been flagged earlier, confirmed the temperature was down, and the likely cause had been identified and documented. She sat with the anxious patient in 410 for 4 minutes before his procedure and talked to him about something entirely unrelated to the procedure, because 4 minutes of something unrelated sometimes did more than 4 minutes of reassurance. She answered a call light in 407 and helped the patient with something that was not medically significant, but was, to the patient, the most important thing happening in their immediate world. She was in the middle of charting when Dr. Patrick Harlan appeared on the 4th floor. This was also not a thing that happened. Harlan, as chief of medical staff, did not perform floor walkthroughs on medical surgical units on weekday mornings without a scheduled reason. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with the particular gravitas of someone whose professional consequence had become physical over decades. He had been at Hartwell for 23 years. He shaped things in this building, often without having to be visible about it. He was visible now. He walked directly to the nurse's station. He looked at Claire. He said her name like he was confirming a fact. "I owe you an apology," Harlan said, and from the way he said it, without preamble, without softening, in the flat tone of a man who is not practiced at this but is doing it anyway, it was clear he had been rehearsing it and had decided that the rehearsed version wasn't going to work any better than the plain one. Claire looked at him. "Dr. Vane spoke with me yesterday," Harlan said. "I listened to his characterization of the events in the overflow room and on this floor, and I did not ask independent questions before forming an opinion. That was a failure of my responsibility as chief of staff." He paused. "The federal visit this morning was not something I anticipated, and I want to be clear that it is not the reason I'm saying this. I'd already asked Linda Forsyth for the full documentation before anyone walked off that elevator." "What changed?" Claire asked. Harlan looked slightly uncomfortable with the directness of the question, which she had intended. "Dr. Soman's statement," he said. "I should have read it earlier. I read it last night." Soman. Of course it was Soman, the person with no institutional stake and no reason to protect Claire, and 20 years of meticulous clinical documentation that would have made her account of the overflow room impossible to dismiss. "The review is still scheduled for tomorrow," Harlan said. "But I want you to know that my recommendation to the committee will reflect what the evidence actually shows." "Thank you," Claire said. Harlan looked like he wanted to say something more, something that would close the exchange more cleanly, give it a better shape. But he didn't find it, and after a moment he nodded and walked back to the elevator. Vane had been at the far end of the hallway during the conversation. He had heard it. His face, from the distance, gave nothing specific away, but his posture had changed in a way that was not subtle if you knew what to look for. The particular deflation of someone whose institutional floor support has just been removed. At noon, the shift was 4 hours in and the floor had reached the particular flat stretch of midday that always felt longer than it was. Claire was eating lunch, an actual break this time, 15 minutes, sitting, when the door to the break room opened and Dr. Natalie Brooks came in looking like she had been carrying something all morning. She sat down without asking. "I gave my statement to HR this morning," she said. "The full account. Everything I heard in the lounge." "Okay," Claire said. "Dr. Harlan was in the lounge," Brooks said. "He was one of the people Vane was talking to. I didn't include that in my statement because I couldn't confirm what Harlan said in response, but I told HR that Harlan was present." Claire set down her food. "Did you tell them that?" "I said I could not confirm Harlan's response, but that he was in the room when Vane characterized the events," Brooks said. Her voice was steady in the way that steadiness looks when it's being held deliberately. "I didn't embellish. I said exactly what I heard and who I saw." Claire looked at her. "That took something." "Maybe," Brooks said. She didn't accept the acknowledgement easily. "I keep thinking about what you said. Don't let fear make your decisions for you." A pause. "I've been letting it make a lot of mine." "That doesn't make you a bad person," Claire said. "It makes you a person." Brooks looked at her with an expression that was complicated in the way that expressions are complicated when someone says the thing you needed to hear in a form you didn't expect. The break room door opened. Rita Castillo leaned in. "You need to come out," she said. Her voice was controlled in the specific way that suggested it was being controlled deliberately. She was looking at Claire. "Vane is at the nurse's station, and he's asking for the Marsh chart." Claire was standing before Rita finished the sentence. She walked out of the break room and into the hallway. And what she saw at the nurse's station was Marcus Vane, who had not taken a single step back from his position in this building, despite everything that had happened in the past 3 hours, standing at the station with Gerald Marsh's chart on the screen and Donna Reyes positioned opposite him with the flat expression of someone who is choosing every word with care. That notation, Vane was saying, is ambiguous, and I'm amending it to clarify. Dr. Vane, Claire's voice was not loud. He turned. That chart is my patient's chart, she said. If you have a clinical concern, you can document it in your own notes. I'd ask you not to modify my notations. I'm the attending physician on this patient, Vane said. The authority in his voice was real. He did have clinical authority over the patients on this floor, but the authority had developed a new quality, like a signal with interference. You are, Claire said, and I'm the nurse who has been managing his daily care. If there's a clinical disagreement about the notation, we can take it to Dr. Owens and resolve it through the appropriate channel. Vane looked at her. He looked at Donna. He looked at the screen. He closed the chart. He walked to the physician's workspace without another word. Donna waited until his footsteps faded, then looked at Claire with an expression that was too controlled to call readable, but was in the vicinity of respect. You doing okay? Donna asked. Yes, Claire said, which was mostly true. She went back to her patients. At 2:30, HR sent a message to Claire's work email confirming the review meeting would proceed as scheduled the following morning at 9 o'clock, and noting that several additional statements had been received and would be included in the committee's review materials. It was signed by Linda Forsyth and co-signed by an HR director whose name Claire had not seen before, which suggested the seniority of the review had been elevated. At 3:10, Margaret Ellis found her in the hallway near the medication room. I gave a formal statement this morning, Margaret said. What I witnessed in the overflow room, all of it. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me, Margaret said, which was the second time today someone had said that to her. I just said what happened. She walked back toward the elevator. Claire watched her go and thought about the accumulation of the day. Harlan's apology, Brooks's statement, Solman's account already in the record, Margaret, Tyler, Donna, Rita's visible allegiance, and underneath all of it, the 22 minutes in the conference room with Warwick and the folder she had not yet opened, and the thing Warwick had said about the review board seeing a federal notation attached to her personnel file. She thought about Vane and the chart and the specific look on his face after Harlan's conversation at the nurse's station, the posture that had shifted, the floor support removed. She thought about the complaint that was still formally pending, about the review meeting tomorrow morning, about the fact that nothing had been officially resolved yet, and institutions moved at their own pace regardless of what had happened in a hallway on a Thursday. She was at the end of the hallway, near the window, when her work phone buzzed, an internal message from Linda Forsyth's office. She opened it. We have received a request from Dr. Vane to postpone the review meeting pending additional documentation he intends to submit. The committee is considering the request. You will be notified by end of business today regarding the new schedule. She read it again. He was adding documentation. He was stalling. He had watched everything that happened today, and instead of stepping back, instead of recalibrating the way a person with a functioning sense of proportion might, he was doubling down, buying time, trying to reshape the record in the space between now and whenever the committee reconvened. She put her phone in her pocket. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth exactly once. She had been in positions before where the person with the least moral footing had the most institutional momentum, where being right was not enough and being right with documentation was also not enough, where the process kept producing outcomes that had no relationship to the actual events that generated them. She had been in those positions, and she had learned to outlast them, and she was going to outlast this one. But the specific effort of doing so while working a full nursing shift, while containing the entirety of what she actually was, so that none of it spilled into a context where it would be misread. She was at the window at the end of the hallway, looking at the parking lot 4 floors below. Behind her, she heard the elevator open. She heard footsteps. Not the footsteps of hospital staff, not the purposeful medium pace of nurses, or the deliberate authority walk of attending physicians. Slower, more deliberate. 2 sets. She turned. Warwick was back. I was with a woman Claire had not seen before. Late 40s, civilian clothes, the unmistakable bearing of someone who operated at a level where being recognized was not an advantage. The woman was carrying a thin envelope, the formal kind with a seal that Claire recognized from a specific category of official correspondence. They were not walking toward the conference room. They were walking toward her. Warwick looked at Claire, and his expression, which had been professionally neutral all morning, had shifted into something that she would not have called warm, but was in the vicinity of something she'd only seen on people who were about to change the terms of a situation entirely. "There's been a development," he said. "There's been a development," he said, and the way he said it told Claire that the development was not the kind that required her to do anything except stand still and receive it. The woman with Warwick stopped 2 feet away. Up close, she had the particular quality of someone whose authority was entirely internal. No visible rank, no badge, nothing that announced itself. She looked at Claire the way people look at someone they have been reading about in documents for a long time and are now adjusting their mental model to account for the actual person. "My name is Alderton," the woman said. "I work with a federal oversight office that interfaces with the unit you were assigned to during your service. We don't need to get more specific than that in this hallway." "All right," Claire said. "The documentation submitted in the cross-reference flag from your employer's HR system triggered a secondary review of your personnel file," Alderton said. She held the envelope but didn't offer it yet. "In the course of that review, we identified a classification error in your service record that has existed since your separation. Specifically, the formal designation of your role during the last 26 months of your service was recorded at a lower clearance tier than the actual operational level at which you functioned." Claire said nothing. "This matters for the current situation," Alderton said, "because the complaint against you characterizes your clinical capabilities as unverified and your actions as outside your documented competency. The corrected record reflects a level of medical operational training and field experience that substantially exceeds anything your civilian nursing credentials currently communicate." "I know what my record reflects," Claire said. "You know what the uncorrected record reflected," Alderton said. "The corrected one is in here." She held out the envelope. "It's been formally amended as of this morning. The relevant sections are no longer classified. You're cleared to share them with any civilian institutional review body as appropriate." Claire took the envelope. It was lighter than she expected. It always was, she thought, for things that had taken years to exist. "We're not directing you on how to use it," Warwick said. "That's your call." "I understand," Claire said. Alderton looked at her for a moment in the way that people sometimes do when they are deciding whether to say the thing they've been thinking. She decided. "What you walked away from to do this job," Alderton said, and she gestured once, briefly, at the hallway around them. The blue walls, the nursing station, the patient rooms, the ordinary infrastructure of a mid-size regional hospital. That's not something most people would do. I want you to know that the people who understand your record know that." Claire looked at her. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it, and she also wanted them to leave, which was a combination she had learned to hold without showing the second part. Warwick gave her a nod. Alderton turned. They walked back to the elevator together, and the doors opened, and they stepped in, and this time the departure had a finality that the morning visit hadn't, the particular quality of a matter being concluded. Claire looked at the envelope. She looked at the hallway. Donna Reyes was at the nurse's station and had seen all of it. Rita Castillo was near the medication cart. Frank Dorsey was not currently on the floor, but he had been in the building all day, and the building talked. Margaret Ellis had gone back to surgical ICU after her statement, but she was connected to this floor in ways that moved through the walls. And at the far end of the hallway, coming out of a patient room with a chart in his hand, was Dr. Marcus Vane. He had seen Alderton and Warwick leave. He had seen Claire standing at the end of the corridor with an envelope bearing a federal seal. His face, from 30 feet, was doing the specific calculation of someone trying to hold on to a position that the ground beneath has begun to shift away from. Claire walked back to the nurse's station. She set the envelope in her bag, which was in the cabinet beneath the station. She logged back into her charting terminal and picked up where she had left off. Donna watched her do this and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Are you going to tell me what's in the envelope?" "Corrected service record," Claire said. "My classification was wrong. It's been fixed." Donna processed this. "Does it help with the review?" "It should," Claire said. Donna nodded once and went back to her own work, which was the most useful response she could have given. At 4:05, Linda Forsyth from HR called Claire's work phone. The voice was the same flat texture as always, but there was something underneath it today. A very slight adjustment in cadence, the kind you hear when a person's script has been altered recently and they haven't fully absorbed the new version yet. Ms. Novak, we've received Dr. Vane's request to postpone the review. The committee has declined the request. Claire said nothing, waiting. The review will proceed tomorrow at 9 a.m. as originally scheduled. Additionally, we have received documentation from a federal office that has been added to your file and will be included in the review materials. The committee chair has reviewed it and has asked that all parties be informed of the schedule confirmation tonight. A pause. Do you have any questions? No, Claire said. Thank you. She ended the call. The postponement had been denied. Vane had tried to buy time, and the committee had looked at whatever Linda Forsyth's office had received, the federal notation, the corrected record, or both, and decided that waiting was not in anyone's interest, which meant that someone on that committee had understood what the documentation meant and had moved accordingly. She spent the last hour of her shift finishing her charting, completing a care coordination note for the patient in 406, and making sure the handoff notes for all her patients were thorough enough that the night shift would have no gaps. She worked with the specific conscientiousness of someone who knows their name is going to be in a review committee's materials tomorrow morning and wants every piece of documentation they've produced to be unassailable. At 5:20, she signed out. She was almost at the elevator when Vane appeared in the hallway ahead of her, not blocking her. He wasn't positioned to block, he was simply there, having come from the physician's workspace, and their paths were converging at the elevator bank in a way that was probably coincidental and probably wasn't. They reached the elevator at the same time. Vane pressed the button. He looked at the doors. He was holding his bag with both hands. The elevator didn't come immediately. The hallway was empty except for the two of them. I heard the committee denied my postponement request, Vane said. He said it to the elevator doors. Claire said nothing. The federal documentation, he said. Whatever's in your service record, that's what changed their calculus. I expect so, Claire said. He was quiet for a moment. The elevator was still coming. I want you to know that my concerns about patient safety were genuine, he said, and the words had the quality of something a person has said to themselves many times in the preceding hours, polishing them, trying to find the angle at which they were most true. I still believe that nurses working outside their established role creates risk. I didn't work outside my role, Claire said. The review will show that. Maybe, he said. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. They both stepped in. They stood on opposite sides. The doors closed. 22 floors of silence and then the lobby, and they walked out in different directions without another word. She drove home in the dark. The days were shortening. November moving into itself. The sky outside Mercer Falls going to black by 5:40. And she sat in her car in her own driveway for 4 minutes without getting out. Not because she was upset. Not because she was afraid of tomorrow. She was sitting there because she had not been alone in a way that counted for any sustained period of the last 3 days. And she needed 4 minutes of nothing before she went inside and made dinner and prepared for a morning that was going to be, in one way or another, the end of this particular stretch. She opened the federal envelope inside. She sat at her kitchen table and read the amended record slowly. It was 12 pages. The language was the particular language of official documents. Dense, abbreviated, organized in a way that presumed the reader already understood the structure it was describing. But the substance was clear, and reading the substance was a strange experience, the way it is always strange to see your own history rendered in institutional language that is accurate in its facts and completely disconnected from what it felt like to live those facts. 3 tours. 2 theaters. Medical support operations at the special operations level for the last 26 months, which was what Alderton had called the classification error. The record had listed her as an attached medic, which was technically not false, but omitted the operational context entirely, the way listing a person as a translator omits that they were running interrogations in 3 languages simultaneously under conditions that would have broken most people in the first week. She read the line that described the Kellerman operation only in terms of dates and unit designation and outcome category. She had lived inside that operation for 11 months. 11 months was a long time to live inside something that 3 lines of institutional language then contained for the rest of documented history. She closed the document. She made pasta. She ate it. She washed the bowl and went to bed. She slept. The review committee met at 9 o'clock a.m. in Conference Room B on the administrative floor of Hartwell General. Claire arrived at 8:50, which was 10 minutes early, which was the same time she always arrived everywhere. The room had a rectangular table, 8 chairs, a projector screen, a window that looked out onto the hospital's south parking lot. There were 4 committee members: Linda Forsyth as the HR representative, Dr. Gail Huang, who was the chief nursing officer, an internal affairs liaison named Robert Steed who handled formal complaint reviews, and which Claire had not expected, Dr. Patrick Harlan, who sat at the end of the table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. Dr. Marcus Vane was already seated when Claire entered. He was across the table, 2 seats from the center. He had a folder in front of him. He did not look at her when she sat down. The committee went through the formal opening, the nature of the complaint, the timeline of events, the process for the review. Linda Forsyth had the flat, textureless voice of official proceedings. Robert Steed took notes. Dr. Huang, who Claire had met only once briefly, watched the room with the particular attention of someone who had been doing institutional work long enough to read what was happening between the documented lines. Then they went through the evidence. Soman's statement was read into the record. It was exact, chronological, and without any language that could be characterized as advocacy. It simply described with clinical precision what had occurred in the overflow room during the mass casualty response. Every decision documented, every action attributed accurately. The picture it produced was unambiguous. Tyler's statement followed. It was shorter and less polished, but it corroborated the specific moment Soman had described from a different vantage point. It also noted that Claire had directed him toward a patient who needed assessment at a moment when Tyler had been uncertain how to prioritize. Donna Reyes's statement was next. It covered the Marsh medication consultation, the pharmacy flag, the appropriate channel, the outcome. It was exact. Derek Olson in pharmacy had also submitted a statement, which was read afterward, and which confirmed that he had initiated the dosing review after Claire requested a consultation, that the review was standard pharmacy practice, and that the result had been communicated directly to Dr. Vane as the prescribing physician. Robert Steed looked up from his notes at that point and asked Vane whether he had been aware that the pharmacy consultation had been initiated through the standard channel. Vane said he had been aware after the fact. Steed made a note. Margaret Ellis's statement was read. It was the longest of the accounts submitted by nursing staff, and it was written in the particular voice of someone who had been at this institution for 22 years and had earned the right to say exactly what she thought in documentation. It described the overflow room clearly, and then it went further. It described what Claire's specific actions had looked like from the perspective of a charge nurse with decades of experience assessing clinical competency. The language was professional, but the evaluation was direct. She had observed a level of situational management under mass casualty conditions that she did not see from most nurses with 10 years of floor experience, let alone 11 days. The committee was quiet during the reading. Harlan's hands had not moved from the table. Then Natalie Brooks's statement was read. It described the conversation in the attendings' lounge. It described Vane's characterization of Claire's military background as a liability and his framing of the overflow response as an example of nursing staff overstepping, because, as Vane had put it, nobody had corrected them early enough. It noted, with the flat precision of someone who had chosen every word carefully, that Dr. Harlan had been present during this conversation. The room temperature changed in a way that was not about the HVAC. Harlan looked at the table. Then he looked at Vane. Vane was looking at his folder. "Dr. Vane," Robert Steed said, in the tone of someone who has the documentation to support what they are about to ask. The statement from Dr. Brooks describes a characterization of events that differs significantly from the account in your original complaint. Specifically, the framing of the mass casualty response as an example of a systemic nursing problem rather than a documented clinical incident involving a specific individual. Can you clarify the intent of that conversation? Vane looked up. He had clearly known this question was coming and had prepared for it, and the preparation showed in the way he paused before speaking, calibrated, not genuine. "I was expressing a general concern about scope of practice boundaries in high-pressure situations," Vane said. "I wasn't intending to characterize the mass casualty response as a systemic failure." "The language Dr. Brooks documented," Steed said, "specifically references military background nursing staff as a category. Can you address that? I was speaking generally, Vane said. In a conversation that named Ms. Novak by role, Steed said. Vane said nothing for a moment. I may have been less precise than I should have been. Gail Huang, who had not spoken yet, said, Dr. Vane, did you discuss this complaint with Dr. Harlan prior to its submission? Another pause. We spoke briefly. Did you share the content of the complaint before it was formally submitted to HR? I may have mentioned, yes or no, Huang said. Her voice had not raised. It had, if anything, gotten quieter. Yes, Vane said. Harlan shifted in his chair. Steed made a note. Claire watched him write it and did not look at Vane. Then Linda Forsythe read the notation from Claire's federal personnel file into the record. She did it with the same neutral cadence she used for everything, but the room changed again, because what she was reading was not the classified content that was still protected, but the formal notation of the file's revised classification tier and the cross-reference flag. She read the line that stated the amended record had been reviewed by the committee chair prior to the meeting. She read the line that stated the level of medical operational training documented in the corrected record substantially exceeded the training requirements for the clinical actions cited in the complaint. She set the paper down. The committee was quiet for a specific kind of moment, the kind where everyone present has just recalibrated and none of them want to be the first to move. Steed cleared his throat. Before we move to deliberation, is there anything Ms. Novak would like to add to the record? Claire looked at the table for a half-second, then at the committee. No, she said. The documentation speaks accurately. Steed nodded. Dr. Vane, he said, is there anything you'd like to add to the record before we move to deliberation? Vane looked at his folder. He looked at the committee. He looked briefly at Claire, and it was the first time he had looked at her directly since they had sat down. And what was in his expression was not anger and not defiance. It was the specific look of someone who has spent 3 days constructing a building and has just watched the foundational wall be removed and is standing in the rubble of the remaining structure trying to remember who he was before he decided this was worth doing. No, he said. The committee asked both parties to step out. Claire stood in the hallway outside Conference Room B and looked at the south-facing window at the end of the corridor, the parking lot, the gray November sky, a maintenance truck parked at an angle near the service entrance. Vane stood approximately 15 feet from her, also in the hallway, also not speaking. He had his folder in his hands. He was looking at the floor. They stood there for 11 minutes. The door opened. Robert Steed stepped out and asked them to come back in. The committee had moved into their chairs with the particular arrangement of people who have reached a conclusion and are now organizing themselves to deliver it. Harlan was still at the end of the table. His expression was the expression of a man who has identified something he did wrong and is sitting inside that identification rather than moving away from it, which was, Claire thought, at least something. Steed read the findings. The complaint was dismissed in full. Both the original allegation regarding the mass casualty overflow response and the supplemental allegation regarding the Marsh pharmacy consultation were found to be unsupported by the documented evidence. The committee found that Claire had acted within appropriate scope of practice in both instances, had operated under the direction and supervision of the relevant attending physician during the overflow event, and had followed standard procedure in requesting a pharmacy consultation on the 4th floor. He read the next section. The committee had found that the complaint contained characterizations of events that were inconsistent with multiple independent witness accounts. The committee had further found that the supplemental allegation had been added after the initial complaint, targeting an event that had been properly documented and reviewed by the relevant clinical and pharmaceutical staff at the time it occurred. He read the next section. The committee recommended that Dr. Vane's supervisory duties be suspended pending a formal review of his conduct over the period of this complaint, including the characterizations made in the attendings lounge and the pre-submission disclosure of complaint content to the Chief of Medical Staff. The review would be conducted by an independent panel. Dr. Vane would be required to complete a formal professional conduct assessment and training program before any reinstatement of supervisory responsibilities. Steed set the papers down. Any questions? He said. Vane was looking at the table. He said nothing. Ms. Novak? Steed said. No, Claire said. Gail Huang leaned forward slightly. Ms. Novak, I want to state for the record that the nursing office will be issuing a formal acknowledgement of the exceptional circumstances of your performance during the mass casualty event. That will go into your personnel file here at Hartwell." "Thank you," Claire said. "And the complaint," Huang said, "will be permanently removed from your disciplinary record. As of today." Claire nodded. The meeting closed. In the hallway, Vane walked toward the elevator without stopping. Claire stood near the door to conference room B for a moment, letting the hallway be empty, letting the morning be what it had been, and settle into something she could carry in a normal way. Harlan was the last one out of the conference room. He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway with the particular look of a person who has decided to stop moving away from something. "I want to say something," he said. Claire waited. "I've been at this institution for 23 years, Harlan said. In that time, I've seen complaints used correctly, and I've seen them used as tools. I knew the difference in this case, and I didn't act on what I knew." He paused. "I told myself that I was waiting for process. I was actually waiting to see which way it settled before committing to a position. That's not the same thing, and I know that." "It isn't," Claire said. "I'll be recommending to the board that the complaint review process be revised," Harlan said, "specifically the provision that allows supplemental allegations to be added after initial submission without independent corroboration." "That's a good revision," Claire said. Harlan looked at her. He nodded once and walked toward the elevator. Claire went back to the 4th floor. The morning was half over and her patients needed her, and the floor didn't stop because a review committee had just dismantled a 3-day attempt to push her out of a building she had a right to be in. Room 406 needed a reassessment. Gerald Marsh's creatinine was trending, and she wanted to look at the updated labs before the hospitalist made his rounds. The anxious patient in 410 was going home today and needed discharge teaching. She did her job. At 11:30, Rita Castillo found her near the supply room and said, without ceremony, "Vane's off the schedule." "I know," Claire said. "Word travels fast," Rita said. "In this building, always." Rita looked at her for a moment. "You okay?" "Yes," Claire said. It was still mostly true. "Good," Rita said, and walked away, which was the correct response. At noon, Claire was in the break room eating lunch, actually eating, seated, with 12 minutes left in her break, when the door opened and Marcus Vane walked in. He looked like someone who had aged 3 years since 9 a.m. He was not in his clinical coat. He was holding a paper cup of coffee that he had apparently gotten from the machine in the corner, and he stood near the door with the specific posture of someone who had decided to do something and was in the process of doing it before they could change their mind. He looked at her. "I didn't know," he said. It was the most honest thing she had heard him say in 11 days, which was not a high bar, but it was something. "I know," she said. "I wouldn't have—" He stopped. Started again. "If I had known the scope of your background, I wouldn't have—" "Dr. Vane," Claire said, and her voice was quiet and not unkind. "That's the wrong conclusion." He looked at her. "The problem wasn't that you didn't know my background," she said. "The problem was that you decided you knew enough to dismiss me before you'd seen any actual evidence. The problem was that when evidence appeared, the Marsh consult, the overflow room, what Dr. Soman said, you treated it as a threat instead of information." She paused. "Knowing that I had a classified service record wouldn't have fixed that. It would have just given you a different reason to defer to me. That's not the same as seeing me." Vane stood with his coffee cup and said nothing for a long moment. "I filed a complaint based on what I thought I saw," he said finally, "and I was wrong." "Yes," Claire said. He nodded slowly. "What do you want me to do?" She looked at him. There was something almost painful about how genuinely he seemed to be asking. "If you want to make it right," she said, "you start with the people on this floor who watched you build this. Donna, Rita, Tyler. The people who had to navigate this situation while working next to me." She paused. "And you look at why your first instinct when I caught that medication error was to feel threatened instead of grateful, because that instinct is going to follow you to the next new nurse and the one after that." Vane was quiet. "I'm not your accountability plan," Claire said. "That part is yours." She finished her lunch. She put the container in her bag. She stood up and walked past him toward the door. "Novak," he said. She stopped. "I'm going to do the training," he said. "The conduct assessment. Not because the committee required it." He paused. "Because you're right." She looked at him for one moment. "Good," she said, and walked out. The afternoon ran. At 3:45, Gerald Marsh pressed his call light because he wanted help reaching the water cup on his tray table. Claire came in, moved the cup to within his reach, and he looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had been watching the tenor of the floor for 3 days. "Something happened today," he said. "There was a review meeting," she said. "It went well." "The complaint?" "Dismissed." Marsh nodded slowly. He looked at the water cup. "My wife would have liked you," he said. "She had that same thing, the thing where you don't need people to know how competent you are. You just are." Claire looked at him. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle it came through at this time of day, flat and November pale. And the room was quiet in the particular way that rooms with one patient in them are quiet. "Thank you, Mr. Marsh," she said. She was on her way out of his room, pulling the door partially closed behind her, when her work phone buzzed. An internal message. From an address she didn't recognize. Not HR, not the nursing office, not any of the committee members. She looked at the sender field. It was from the hospital's legal department. She opened the message. "Ms. Novak, we have received a formal legal inquiry from counsel representing Dr. Vane, submitted this afternoon, requesting documentation of the federal personnel review process that occurred in connection with the complaint. We want to inform you that the hospital is not obligated to produce classified documentation and will not be doing so. However, we want to make you aware that this inquiry exists, as it may indicate an intention to challenge the committee's findings through external channels." She read it twice. She put her phone in her pocket. She stood in the hallway outside Gerald Marsh's room with the November light coming through the window at the end of the corridor, and she thought about the fact that Marcus Vane, who had spent 12 minutes in a break room apparently arriving at something resembling genuine accountability, had apparently also, in that same afternoon, retained legal counsel to challenge the committee that had just found against him. Both of those things were true at the same time. She had seen people hold contradictions before. She had seen people mean what they said and also be afraid of what meaning it would cost them. She had seen people take the first step toward accountability and then flinch at the second. She understood it. It didn't make the legal inquiry disappear. She pulled her phone back out and opened the message again, and this time she noticed the timestamp, 3:38 p.m., 7 minutes ago. The meeting had ended at 10:52 a.m., which meant Vane had filed the inquiry before he came to the break room, before the coffee cup, before "I'm going to do the training." He had filed it first, and then he had come to find her. She stood in that hallway for 45 seconds. Not frozen, she was never frozen, but still in the way that people are still when they are integrating two pieces of information that don't resolve cleanly against each other and deciding, with full clarity, what that means and what they are going to do about it. He had filed the legal inquiry at 3:38. He had walked into the break room at approximately 3:50. He had said, "I'm going to do the training, and you're right," and had looked at her with the particular expression of genuine arrival, the look of someone who has finally found the version of themselves that can admit a thing. And he had done all of that after already retaining counsel to challenge the findings. She understood it. That was the honest part. She understood it because she had spent 10 years working in environments populated by people who were capable of real moral feeling and real self-protective instincts simultaneously, who could mean what they said in a room and also be afraid of what meaning it would cost them in the next room. People were not sequential. They did not resolve their contradictions before acting on them. They held the apology and the lawsuit in the same chest cavity and walked through the world with both. Understanding it didn't make the legal inquiry disappear. She went back to her patients. She finished the afternoon. She did discharge teaching for the patient in 410, a 57-year-old man named Harold Quint, who had been anxious all week and was now anxious about going home. And she sat with him for 9 minutes, going through the wound care instructions and the medication schedule and the signs that would require him to come back. And she did it in the same steady, factual way she did everything, until the anxiety in his face had converted itself into something that looked closer to manageable. "You're going to be all right," she said, which was a clinical assessment, not a promise. "I know," he said. "I'm just better with people around." "Your daughter is picking you up?" "Yeah." He smiled a little. "She's going to make me soup for a week." "Good," Claire said. She updated his discharge chart. She walked him to the elevator when his daughter arrived. A woman in her 30s who hugged her father immediately and looked at Claire over his shoulder with the expression of someone who had been worried for days and was now releasing it. "Thank you," the daughter said. "He did all the work," Claire said, which was also a clinical assessment and also not entirely false. She went back to the floor. At 5:10, she received a call from the hospital's legal department, not the message from before, an actual call, from an attorney named Raymond Chu, who had a careful, precise voice, and who explained that the hospital's position regarding Vane's external legal inquiry was that the committee findings were fully supported by documented evidence, and that the hospital would not be cooperating with any effort to produce privileged or classified personnel documentation. "I want you to understand," Chu said, "that this inquiry is being treated as an attempt to relitigate a committee decision. The hospital's legal team will be responding to Vane's counsel directly. You don't need to respond to anything they send you." "What does the inquiry actually ask for?" Claire said. "They're requesting the federal documentation that was introduced into your personnel file," Chu said. "Specifically, the amended service record." "That's a classified federal document," Claire said. "Yes," Chu said, "which is precisely why the request has no viable legal basis. We'll be handling the response." A pause. "Ms. Novak, I want to be direct with you. This kind of inquiry, filed within hours of a committee decision, is usually a pressure tactic. It says more about the filer's state of mind than about the merits of the underlying claim." "I know what it is," Claire said. "All right," Chu said. "You'll hear from us if anything develops that requires your input. I expect it won't." She ended the call and signed out of her shift. The drive home took longer than usual because there was a backup on the main route out of Mercer Falls. A fender bender at the intersection near the hardware store, 2 cars pulled to the side, a police unit with its lights going. And she sat in the slow accumulation of vehicles and let the brake lights ahead of her be the only thing requiring her attention for a while. She thought about the legal inquiry. She thought about it the way she'd learned to think about decisions made by people in difficult positions. Not with contempt, not with the moral clarity that comes from being outside the difficult position, but with the recognition that Marcus Vane was doing what frightened people do when the structure they've built their identity inside begins to collapse. He was reaching for any available handhold. The apology had been real. The legal filing had also been real. Both of those things were him. The backup cleared. She drove home. She made dinner. She ate. She opened her laptop and looked at nothing useful for 20 minutes and then closed it. She went to bed at 9:30 and she did not sleep immediately, which was unusual, and when she finally did, she dreamed something she didn't remember clearly in the morning. Something about a field and a lot of space and the specific quality of air that exists at altitude. Her alarm went off at 5:45. She lay there for the usual 1 minute. Then she got up. The morning was 4 days after the review, and the specific texture of the 4th floor had changed in ways that were not dramatic but were real. The change was the kind that happens after a long-held tension resolves, not an explosion of warmth, not a sudden reconstruction of all prior dynamics, but a settling, a recalibration. The floor returning to itself with Claire in it rather than alongside it. Donna Reyes handed off with the same professional evenness she always had, but there was something in the handoff that had been absent before, a directness, an assumption of competence that wasn't previously extended. Small things. She asked Claire's opinion on a patient's care trajectory without framing it as seeking agreement. She referenced a chart note Claire had written as a reliable data point rather than information to be verified. Rita Castillo brought 2 cups of coffee to the nurse's station at 7:30 and set one in front of Claire without saying anything, which was Rita's version of a ceremony. Tyler, who had submitted his statement and had apparently been holding the weight of it for days, found Claire near the supply room at 8 Monk and said, "I heard the findings." "Yeah," Claire said. "Good," he said. And then, with the specific relief of someone who had done the right thing and is only now letting themselves feel it, "I'm glad I said something." "So am I," Claire told him. The floor moved. The patients needed things. The morning went the way mornings go when a unit is functioning the way it should. Not effortlessly, not without friction, but with the particular forward motion that comes from a group of people who understand their roles and are executing them. At 9:15, Gail Huang, the chief nursing officer, appeared on the 4th floor. This was becoming a pattern, people with no floor-level operational reason appearing on the 4th floor. But Huang's presence had a different quality than the administrator appearances of the past week. She wasn't managing a situation. She came to the nurse's station, asked for Claire, and when Claire appeared, she handed her a printed document. "This is the formal acknowledgement," Huang said. "It goes into your personnel file today." Claire looked at it. It was on hospital letterhead, signed by Huang and countersigned by the hospital director. It described the mass casualty overflow response, named Claire specifically as a contributing member of the clinical team, and noted that her actions during that event had been reviewed by a formal committee and found to reflect exceptional clinical competency and appropriate professional conduct. It stated that the formal complaint previously submitted against her had been found to be unsubstantiated and had been permanently removed from her disciplinary record. It was a single page. It said exactly what it needed to say. "Thank you," Claire said. "That document exists because you did the work," Huang said. "The committee just confirmed what the evidence showed." She paused. "I also want to tell you that I'm recommending a review of how our complaint process handles allegations involving supplemental filings. The current policy has gaps. This situation made them visible." "Harlan said the same thing," Claire said. "He did," Huang said. "He's the one who brought it to me." She looked at Claire steadily. "He's not a bad man. He made a bad decision. There's a difference." "I know," Claire said. Huang nodded and left. Claire folded the acknowledgement once and put it in her bag. She went back to her patients. The legal inquiry from Vane's counsel was formally rejected by the hospital's legal team that afternoon. Raymond Chu sent Claire a brief email confirming this. The request for classified federal documentation had been denied. The hospital had declined to cooperate with any further inquiry into the committee's findings, and Vane's counsel had been informed that any future contact regarding this matter should be directed to the hospital's legal department rather than to individual staff. 3 hours after that, Chu sent a follow-up. Vane's counsel had withdrawn the inquiry entirely. She read the email twice, set her phone face down on the break room table, and finished her coffee. The withdrawal didn't surprise her. The inquiry had been a pressure tactic from the beginning, an attempt to make the space after the committee decision feel uncertain, contested, provisional. When the hospital held firm and the legal basis dissolved on contact with an attorney who knew what classified documentation meant, there was nothing left to contest. Vane had reached for a handhold and found air. She thought about what that moment felt like, the moment when you reach and find nothing, and she did not feel satisfaction about it exactly, but she felt something adjacent to resolution, the sense of a line being drawn where it needed to be. The day went on. At 3 o'clock, she was doing a medication check in the hallway when she heard footsteps behind her. Not the urgent footsteps of a developing situation, just someone walking with purpose, and she turned and found Natalie Brooks. Brooks looked different than she had in the break room 3 days ago. Less like someone carrying a weight, and more like someone who had set the weight down and was still figuring out what to do with their hands. "I heard about the legal filing," Brooks said, "and the withdrawal." "It's done," Claire said. "I wanted to say—" Brooks stopped. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fear-making decisions." She looked at the middle distance for a moment. "I've been at this hospital 18 months, and I have spent approximately 90% of that time calculating the political cost of every interaction I have with a senior physician before I have it. And I think that's made me a worse doctor in some ways that I haven't wanted to look at directly." Claire waited. "I'm looking at them now," Brooks said. "That's all I wanted to say." It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing. Claire had seen enough people resist looking at their own operating system to know that the decision to look was usually the hardest part. "That's worth something," Claire said. "I hope so," Brooks said. And then, with the particular honesty of someone who has recently stopped being strategic, "I was scared of you at first, not because you were threatening, because you were competent in a way that made my own competency feel—" She stopped. "I don't know. Comparative." "We all do that," Claire said. "Does it get easier?" Brooks said. "Watching someone be better at something than you and not making it about yourself?" Claire thought about it honestly. "It gets more automatic," she said. "Better is the wrong word for what it becomes. It just gets less loud." Brooks nodded. "Okay," she said, like she was filing it. She walked back to her patients. Claire walked back to hers. At 4:30, the charge nurse coordinator sent an internal message to all fourth-floor staff confirming that effective. The following Monday, The fourth floor would be operating with a fully updated complaint intake procedure. The new procedure required that any formal complaint involving nursing staff conduct include an initial statement from the supervising physician on duty at the time of the cited incident, submitted concurrently with the complaint, rather than after the fact. Supplemental allegations could only be added within the first 48 hours and required documented clinical rationale. The message stated that the procedure update had been recommended by Dr. Harlan and approved by the nursing board. Rita Castillo read it at the nurses' station, made a sound that was not quite a word, and went back to her charting. Donna Reyes read it without expression, as Donna read everything, and then said, "Overdue." It was, Claire thought, an accurate summary. The last patient she saw that day was Gerald Marsh, who was scheduled for discharge the following morning, but had been moved to the list of patients Claire would follow through the end of her Thursday shift. He was sitting up when she came in, which was better than he'd been at the start of the week. His creatinine had stabilized, his mobility was improving, and the particular anxiety that hospitalized patients sometimes carry, the low-level dread of being in a building with machines and strangers, had receded from his face. "Last night," he said when she came in. "Almost," she said. "Discharge is tomorrow morning." "Will you be here?" "I'm day shift," she said. "I'll be here for part of it." He seemed to be calculating something. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. That thing that happened this week," he said. "The complaint. The military people. All of it." He looked at her steadily. "You never looked scared." "I was," she said. "I just didn't find it useful." He thought about that. "My wife used to say something like that. She'd say, 'Fear is information, not instruction.'" He paused. "I didn't understand it when she said it. I think I'm starting to." Claire looked at him. "She sounds like someone who had it figured out." "More than I did," he said. "Most of the time, more than I did." He adjusted the water cup on his tray. No help needed this time, just habit. "You're good at this job, the whole job, not just the medical parts." "The whole job is the medical parts," she said. He laughed, which was a good sound to hear in a hospital room. She checked his chart, updated his notes, adjusted his discharge instructions based on the day's labs, and told him she'd see him in the morning. She pulled the door mostly closed behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment. The fourth floor was at the particular point of the late afternoon where the day shift and the evening shift were beginning to overlap at the edges. The floor not yet fully handed off, but beginning to release. The quality of the light through the windows having shifted from the flat, midday gray to the slightly warmer angle that meant late afternoon in November, the patients settling into their pre-dinner quiet. She had 11 days of this floor behind her, and she knew its rhythms now. Not perfectly, the way you can't know any complex living system perfectly, but functionally, in the way that you know a place when you have worked inside it with your full attention. She thought about what she had come here to do. Not the classified history, not the operational record, not Warwick or Alderton or the folder with its 12 pages of amended documentation. She had come here to do this. The discharge instructions and the medication checks and the 9 minutes with Harold Quint about wound care and the 4 minutes in Gerald Marsh's room listening to him remember his wife. She had come here because after 10 years of operating at the edge of what the human body and the human mind could sustain, she had wanted to find out what it felt like to use those skills in a place where the ceiling wasn't falling in. She had wanted to be useful in a way that was quiet. She had not expected someone to make it loud again. She had not expected to have to fight for the right to be unremarkable. But she had fought it, and not by deploying what she'd been. By being exactly what she was now, a nurse on a medical surgical floor who caught the things that needed catching and said the things that needed saying and did not collapse when someone decided she was less than she was. That was the part she wanted to keep. She went to the nurses' station for her end-of-shift documentation. Marcus Vane was not on the floor. He had not been on the fourth floor since the review. His patient list had been redistributed to the covering hospitalists, and the formal independent panel review of his conduct was, according to the HR system update she'd received that afternoon, beginning the following week. I was not suspended from practicing medicine. The committee hadn't had the authority to do that, and the findings hadn't warranted it. But he was not in a supervisory role, and he would not be until the panel concluded and the professional conduct assessment was complete. She thought about what he was doing right now, sitting somewhere, probably. trying to reconcile the version of himself that had filed the complaint with the version of himself that had said, "You're right," in a break room, and underneath both versions, the deeper question of which one was actually him. That was not a comfortable question. She knew that because she had her own version of it. Everyone did. She didn't wish him badly. She wished him the specific discomfort of accurate self-examination, which was the thing that might actually produce something useful. She finished her documentation at 5:35. She logged out. She collected her bag. Donna Reyes was doing the evening handoff at the station, and she paused when Claire appeared. "Good shift," Donna said. It was not effusive. It was not a speech. It was Donna Reyes's version of what the acknowledgement letter had been Gail Huang's version of a statement of fact from someone who did not issue them carelessly. "Thank you," Claire said. She walked to the elevator. Margaret Ellis was waiting for it, apparently heading down at the same time, the end of her own shift having converged with Claire's by accident or not. She looked at Claire in the way she had from the beginning, without the social softening that most interactions contain. The direct look of someone who assessed people accurately and had done so with Claire from the moment she'd sat down across from her in a break room with a cup of someone else's coffee. "How are you doing?" Margaret said. It was not a corridor pleasantry. She meant it. "I'm all right," Claire said. "Actually, all right." "Good." Margaret looked at the elevator floor indicator. "You're staying?" "I'm staying," Claire said. Margaret nodded once. "Good," she said again. The elevator arrived. They rode down together in the comfortable quiet of two people who did not need to fill silences. The lobby was in its early evening configuration. The day's traffic mostly concluded, the gift shop closed, the reception desk at reduced staffing, the ambient light lower and warmer than the midday fluorescence. Curtis, the security guard, was at his post with his thermos. He nodded at Claire. She nodded back. She pushed through the front doors into the November evening. It was cold in the specific way of North Carolina in late fall. Not brutal, but honest, the kind of cold that moves through a coat if you stand in it long enough. The parking lot lights were on. Her breath made small clouds. The sky was the deep blue of 5:40 p.m. in November, not yet black but committed to the direction. She found her car. She put her bag in the passenger seat. She sat for a moment before starting the engine, not because she needed to, but because she had learned, somewhere in the last 11 days, to take the moments that were actually available to her rather than cataloging them as delays. She thought about what she had learned and what she had already known, and the space between those things. She had known how to function under pressure. She had known how to maintain accuracy when everything around her was demanding inaccuracy. She had known how to read a room, how to anticipate a deteriorating situation, how to communicate precisely when precision was the difference between someone going home and someone not going home. What she had learned, or maybe relearned, or maybe finally let herself hold, was that those things were worth the same in a hospital hallway as they had been in any of the other places she'd done them. That the scale of a crisis does not determine the value of the competency brought to it. That the patient in bed 2 of the overflow room and the patient in 410, anxious about going home, were both real people in real situations requiring real presence, and that she had given both of them the same thing, her full attention, her accurate assessment, her willingness to be there for the specific duration that was needed. She had spent 10 years being prepared for things most people would never encounter. She had spent the last 11 days learning that preparation was not the point. Being present was the point. Being someone that the people in front of you could actually count on, not because of what you'd done somewhere else, not because of what a federal document said about your clearance level, but because of what you did in this hallway, with this patient, in this moment. That was what she had come here for. It turned out it was worth fighting for. She started the engine. She drove out of the parking lot and into the streets of Mercer Falls, which were in their early evening configuration. The workday traffic mostly through, the restaurants beginning to fill, the ordinary infrastructure of a mid-sized city going about the business of a Thursday night. She drove through it without urgency and without the low-grade alertness that had been running in her chest for the better part of a week. And what replaced it was not exactly peace. She was not sure she was built for peace in the way some people meant it, but something that functioned like clarity, like knowing exactly where you are on a map. She thought about tomorrow, Gerald Marsh going home in the morning, the new complaint procedure taking effect Monday, the panel review of Vane's conduct beginning next week, Brooks, somewhere in the building right now, looking at the version of herself that had been letting fear make decisions. Tyler, who had given a statement when it cost him something to do so. Rita Castillo with 2 cups of coffee. Donna Reyes saying good shift like it was a complete sentence because it was. She thought about Margaret Ellis in the elevator, asking, "Are you staying?" and the ease with which Claire had answered, because it was true and had been true since before the question was asked. She was staying. This floor, with its rhythms and its difficult people, and its patients who needed their water cups moved and their anxieties held steadily, and their medication dosages checked by someone who was paying enough attention to notice when the numbers didn't align. This was where she was. Not because she had nowhere else to go, because this was where she had chosen to put herself, and the choice had been tested, and it had held. There is a particular kind of person who gets told, in 100 different ways across the arc of their life, that they are less than they are, less qualified, less reliable, less worthy of the space they occupy. And there is a particular kind of response to that, not the loud one, not the defensive one, not the one that requires an audience, but the quiet one, the one that shows up tomorrow and does the work, the one that catches what needs catching and says what needs saying and does not become cruel in the face of cruelty, the one that carries the weight of what it knows without wearing it like armor or hiding it like shame. That response is not easy. It is, in some ways, the hardest thing a person can do because it asks you to keep going in the face of a world that has decided not to see you yet and to trust, not in the world's eventual fairness, because that's not guaranteed, but in your own continued capacity to be exactly what you are regardless of whether anyone is acknowledging it. Claire Novak had made that choice every day for 11 days in a hospital that had tried in various ways to make her smaller than she was. She had refused. Not loudly, not dramatically. She had refused in the way that competent people refuse, by continuing to be competent, by continuing to be present, by continuing to do the work at the standard she knew the work deserved, whether or not anyone in the room recognized the standard. She drove into the Mercer Falls evening with the heater running and her hands at 10 and 2 and the deep blue sky deepening toward black at the edges. And what she felt was not triumph, because triumph is loud and temporary, and she had learned that the things worth keeping were neither. What she felt was simpler. She felt like herself. After everything, after the complaint and the review and the soldiers in the hallway and the document with 12 pages of amended history and the man in the break room with a coffee cup and a lawyer on retainer, after all of it, she felt exactly like the person she had decided to be when she traded a classified clearance and a tactical assignment for a nursing license and a 4th-floor shift in a mid-sized regional hospital in North Carolina. She had come here to be a nurse. She still was one. And no one had taken that. No one ever would.